Hello. Today we're going to talk about the apocalypse. Popular culture seems obsessed with post-apocalyptic settings over the last decade, be it the endless parade of zombie fare like Walking Dead or The Hunger Games, I Am Legend, even Marvel Cinematic Universe is getting in on the act with Endgame. One of my personal favourites of this genre is the video game The Last of Us. A fairly stock tale of a world after yet another viral outbreak results in pseudo-zombies taking over the world and leaving society in ruins. Where the game differs from others, though, is in its interests in character and how they interact with the overarching plot. It puts a man, Joel, who lost his daughter, with another young girl, Ellie, who may hold the key to the curing of the virus which creates a unique conflict at the centre of the story. The result is Joel saves Ellie at the expense of finding a cure, and at the expense of the lives of several hundred people, possibly dooming the survival of the human race in the process. It's an undeniably bleak game, but what it perfectly encapsulates is where this desire for an end of all things comes from, and how it reflects the contemporary feeling towards the future. Because the post-apocalypse is not the end of the world, but capitalism's ultimate conclusion. To understand what this means and how deeply this is entrenched, let's go back to a 19th century poem. An early work of post-apocalyptic fiction, as it is seen now, is Byron's poem Darkness, written in 1816, referred to as the year without a summer, due to a drop in global temperatures and abnormal weather caused by the eruption of Mount Tambora. In the poem, Byron describes a morning which brought no day, resulting in war, which did glut himself again, and the collapse of society, leaving only 2 of an enormous city did survive, and they were enemies. While all the tropes of modern post-apocalyptica are there, it is lines near the beginning that draw the attention. And men forgot their passions in the dread of this their desolation, and all hearts were chilled into a selfish prayer for light. Byron foresaw this desire for a collapse of civilization at the slightest tremor in the same way modern post-apocalyptic fiction also does. And the selfish prayer for light perfectly embodies the desire centrist and capital L liberalism has fostered in the last 50 years. The post-apocalypse, as contemporary fiction has it, is an arena of the self, a world owned by the individual. In the same way survivalist culture prompts an individual to plan for a coming apocalypse, these stories show us the world after this change and how we might master it. Gone are the concerns and restrictions of society and the social contract. Only the purest form of social mobility remains. The post-apocalypse is a world possessed by the individual, specifically you. This former conveniently ignores the fact that if the world were to end in one of these arguably preventable ways, then you would absolutely not survive the initial wave of deaths. Whether it's nuclear war, viral infection, zombie plague, or demigod titan snapping his fingers, the sheer volume of fatalities reduces your chances of survival to almost nothing. If only a handful of people can survive this reckoning, then it is unlikely to be you or I, yet it is always sold as, what would you do in this situation? The post-apocalypse acts as a fantasy, a manifestation of the neoliberal desire for complete and total autonomy. When Byron describes the thrones, the palaces of crowned kings, the huts were burnt for beacons, echoes of it can be heard in Thatcher's classless society. The Last of Us ends with Joel allowing his selfish desire for a surrogate daughter to overshadow his interest in saving his fellow man. The wants of the post-apocalyptic individual are paramount. The only difference between Byron and modern PA fiction is that the modern selfish prayer for light is the apocalypse. Modern frustrations with politics, the complexities of financial institutions and their effects on us, the needs and survival of other social groups forcing themselves onto each of our agendas, all have added to a sense of alienation and dissatisfaction with the modern world for many, and an apocalypse seems like a quick, simple, and selfish way of reverting to the chimeric, simpler way of life the centre and the right so often laud. Yet these stories also struggle with what an apocalypse actually is. Apocalypse is a Greek word that means revelation, or literally, a lifting of the veil. It refers to a change, not an end. Most of what we call post-apocalyptic fiction refers to a different Greek word, eschatology, meaning variously the end of man, the destiny of mankind, or, significantly, the end of history. It can be no coincidence, then, that towards the end of the 20th century, writers like Francis Fukuyama believed we had reached this fabled end of history, in the relative peace and prosperity of the majority white English-speaking world. This description of eschatological desire seems better suited to the modern glut of stories about a world of me, whereas apocalypse seems better suited to understanding the very real lifting of the veil we are experiencing in culture today. With younger generations vocally and fiercely challenging the hegemonic insistence of accepted procedures and received wisdom, identifying them for the ideologies they are, a lot of scales are falling from many eyes across the globe, thanks to social movements and social media as a rallying point. If this era can be seen as a lifting of the veil in that way, what would this form of post-apocalypse look like? The hysterical cries from certain corners of the news media that the world is ending are not believed by even those who spout them, but the panic that imbues these statements is very real. Looking at the result of the 2019 UK election as a cementing of the desire to retain the status quo and the ramifications therein is a topic for another video, but perhaps this somewhat self-destructive turn toward openly catastrophic and selfish leaders is part of the eschatological desire to counteract the real apocalypse happening around us. This also explains why those entrenched in the cult of neoliberalism that so plagues the news cycle and opinion pieces in media today, in addition to the creators of PA fiction, are so hysterically opposed to the likes of Bernie Sanders and Jeremy Corbyn. Because they recognise that this is not the rapture nor displacement towards the individualist nirvana of stories like Dawn of the Dead, but instead a true apocalypse of the current societal model. Instead of the bleak demands on the individual set out by The Last of Us, on the contrary, we are already living through a form of apocalypse. The future might look bleak for everyone right now, but that's because we are looking at the future with contemporary demands. Something the recent television show Years and Years was guilty of. No, life after this apocalypse will look less like a selfish prayer for light, and, if the next generation are anything to go by, more of a common prayer for others. Today we learned some poetry. What an apocalypse is, and what it isn't. Why there are so many depictions of it in popular culture right now, and how it is indicative of the selfish mentality portrayed and performed by every power structure across the globe today. Be sure to note this down in your textbooks, as these topics will come up in later videos. Thanks for watching.